All right. Well, it's good to see everyone. Welcome to Truth Seekers, our third Tuesday of the week. There's been a lot going on, and we're going to, in fact, sometimes it's tough to figure out what do you want to talk about, right? Because we try to obviously talk about things that are going on politically, culturally, but also to tie them to a biblical framework and why, as the church, should we care about this. And sometimes that's hard to do, and sometimes we may miss that mark, but that's what we strive to do. And there are so many things going on, and there's different reactions to that. And today, one of the things that I'm kind of thinking about this coming from a perspective, if you use kind of the labels that we have politically, you have what was liberal, which if you have the original definition of a classical liberal, most of us would fit with parts of that, right? You know, freedom of speech, things like that. But then that liberal began to move a little bit further and became more associated with big government, more government intervention. So then you had liberal, and then you had conservative, which would be less government intervention, smaller government, and these are very broad, terms. Now I believe we're dealing with leftism, which is even further than liberal. We've talked a little bit about some of the differences there. And then there's the term libertarian. And I know within our group there's a lot of people that kind of lean libertarian, which means we don't want the government telling us what to do, if at all possible. Right? Now, that opens up, though, for lots of arguments of where is that limit. And I find myself struggling with that at times because what we're seeing happen is we're seeing the governmental powers, whether they are there or not, being used to enforce will. And that is really hard if you are a conservative or a libertarian, because you just want the government to leave you alone, right? But we're up against a force that it will use the government to push its ideology. And we have to kind of understand that in order to stand up and push back against it. There's a couple of examples, and they don't tie completely together, but they both, to me, illustrate the level of conviction that what I believe is the spirit of the age, the opposite, the kind of in the spiritual battle of good versus evil, kind of that wants to push us further away from God. The conviction is pretty impressive. I mean, they have a high level of conviction and are using political structures and institutions to push that agenda. And we've talked about this before, but the issue of gender ideology, transgenderism, that is not a passing thing. And it feels like we've been talking about it for a while, but really this is a fairly new phenomenon, at least how it's being pushed now. Beforehand, most everyone agreed that there are those who choose to live in a different way. And you know what? That most people were fine with that. However, now it's being pushed as an ideology that is designed to be taught to children, which is designed to cause chaos and confusion, and it will hurt children, which in turn hurts society. And if you're conservative, you desire for the government not to do things that are going to hurt society. So we probably are going to have to figure out ways through our governmental institutions, to stop the evil ideology. Because if we don't, it will become instituted in our country. And frankly, there's some days I wonder how you're going to get rid of it. But I want to just show a few clips today about how embedded this is becoming. The level of conviction that you have. So Rachel Levine, I didn't couldn't find a clip of this. He was speaking, that's not politically correct, but he was speaking to a group of pediatric doctors about gender-affirming care, which when you hear that term, gender-affirming care, it's important to know that what they're talking about is using chemicals to block puberty, using many times the same chemicals that are used for chemical castration. They also are talking about children under 18, right? This is where the issue is. We're not talking about adults here. We're talking about kids. Children under 18 going through sex reassignment surgeries, which are completely irreversible. We do not allow children to get a tattoo under 18. Why? Because that's a permanent thing, right? That we all know they're probably going to change their mind on, right? And so you have to have permission of some sort to do that. And here we are, there are people fighting tooth and nail to say your 13-year-old can decide to cut off their healthy breast or whatever it may be. Okay, so that's where we are. And Rachel Levine said this, says, I can say that you, the children that you serve, again talking to pediatric doctors, the young people that you serve, their families, and you all have the support at the highest levels of the federal government. Right? Said, President Biden supports you. I, as the Assistant Secretary for Health, will support you and talk about this topic everywhere I go to get the word out. Said, I am positive and optimistic and hopeful that the wheel will turn after that and that this issue won't be as politically and socially such a minefield. Right? This is just beginning. They are going to be pushing this, and a lot of this is being said in response to some states that are starting to make it illegal to do these kinds of surgeries. So again, as a libertarian, you're like, well, we shouldn't make any of those laws. As a conservative, you say, well, we want to do things that aren't going to crumble society. So maybe we need to have some laws because these laws are going to get passed and will get passed, and they're talking about enshrining them into law to where you can't refuse that kind of surgery. So that's what we're up against. It's very challenging and it's complicated, and to pretend it's not is a little disingenuous because it is tough. We shouldn't want to use the government this way. However, it's being used this way to destroy our children. This is the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, I believe, and this is a pretty good summary, I believe, of what the leftist ideology believes, and it's pretty disturbing.
Because let's be clear, this is life-affirming and life-saving healthcare. When our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them. That's what it means to be a good parent.
Okay. No, what it means to be a good parent is to raise your child and to mold them to become a good person and a good adult, and so that they find their purpose and meaning in the fact that they are created in the image of God. If you want to get rid of the image of God, right, and you don't believe all of that, your purpose as a parent is still to raise your child to be an adult, which means you have to teach them and you have to be willing to correct, right? That is mind-numbingly stupid. And the fact that is the the view of many people is completely insane, right? And extremely, extremely dangerous. And if you look at, not to get off into the weeds too much, but if you look at history and authoritarian governments, one thing that they do is they make sure they indoctrinate the children. They are intentional about it, and inherent within that indoctrination is separating the children from their parents, right? and sometimes very physically doing that, but for sure ideologically separating children from their parents. You saw that in Soviet Russia. You saw that in Nazi Germany. All right, that is common. This is intentionally doing that. There are literally thousands of school districts in the country that will not report if your son or your daughter goes to school and is identifying as the opposite gender. They will not tell you that. Right? That is intentionally trying to separate children from parents. Right? This is demonic stuff, and unfortunately, these are our leaders that have been given over to this. They've either been deceived or they are all in and choosing to continue to deceive. One of the things that we talk about here a lot is that we're in the midst of a spiritual battle. One of the ways that I came to that conclusion is, one, I read the news, and then I read the Bible, and I was like, holy cow, things are going, But it's also, there's those passages in Scripture that I didn't fully grasp and understand until I see them acted out. One of those is there will be the time where people call good evil and evil good, right? And we are clearly in that time. So obviously, I think you can tell my perspective on gender-affirming care for minors using the extremes. I'm not talking about getting counseling. I'm not talking about caring and being compassionate. I'm talking about cutting genital off, right? So I look at that and I say that is sinful, right? That is evil. It just, without a question. This is from last week. This is the leader of our country.
Transgender kids is a really harder thing. What's going on in Florida is, as my mother would say, close to sinful. I mean, it's just terrible what they're doing. It's not like, a kid wakes up one morning and says, I decided I want to become a man, or I want to become a woman, or I want to change. I mean, what are they thinking about here? They're human beings. They love, they have feelings, they have inclinations that are, it just, to me, is, I don't know, it's cruel. And the way we do it is we make sure we pass legislation like we passed on same-sex marriage. You mess with that, you're breaking the law, and you're going to be held accountable.
So he's referring to laws that are on, being voted on in Florida to ban that kind of extreme surgeries, right? What term did he use there? Sinful. So to keep children from doing that is sinful. Now, wherever you fall on the argument, I know the people that I'm looking at today, I know where you kind of fall on the argument, but there are many who sit in the pews in church would agree with that. So you now have people who would consider themselves Christian calling the same thing, one calling it good, one calling it evil. That is the definition of a spiritual battle that we are in. And then it's so ironic. I actually agree with him. Kids don't wake up one day and think, you know what, I'm a man or a woman. But they do when they're indoctrinated and their cartoons are teaching it, and when their schools are asking them every day, hey, it looks like you feel a little blue today. Maybe you're really a girl, right? That's how it comes about. That's what we are pushing against. We recognize that there are children who struggle, and there's nearly always other mental issues going on and issues in their family going on that we can help with, rather than just saying, oh, that's great, let's change your gender. That it is insane, right? And unfortunately, the wheels of political power are moving forward with that. You heard him say, what did he say? We need to do the same thing we did with same-sex marriage. What just happened with same-sex marriage? It made it the law of the land where you can't do anything against it, right? Which eventually it will mean that I can't say as a pastor that same-sex marriage is sinful. That's where we're headed. Now, I'm kind of in a one of those moods that I think that's where we're headed. I'm hoping not, but that's kind of the purpose of that. And he specifically said we need to pass legislation to make sure that you can't pass a law to keep a child from going through this kind of procedure, right? That is dangerous. So we have to then look at that as, well, we have to use the political institutions to stop that. And it's hard. It is difficult. Because one of the things that as conservatives we desire is we desire to see the rule of law, right? To see it applied fairly. Well, we're starting to see the rule of law, and there's not a direct correlation here, but what is being done in the world of gender and to our children is causing chaos and causing anger. I mean, let's be honest, if your child goes to school and is indoctrinated and comes back saying that they are a different gender, you're going to be pretty angry. It's just a matter of time before people react in unhealthy ways to that, right? You are putting a lot of pressure on society. Well, we've seen over the last few days that there's the chance that a former president who is in the running to be a president again is going to be indicted. Now, I'm kind of mad about this whole thing because I don't want to defend, I do not want to defend Trump, right? He drives me insane, right? I hate it that he throws this stuff out there and gets everybody inflamed, and everybody's worried about this possible indictment and stuff like that, and then he says, let's go protest, and I know what he meant, but come on, dude, be aware of what's going on. Right? But he's not. He's never will be. He's a narcissist. He's an egomaniac. And he happens to have some beliefs and policies that I agree with. Right? So it's really difficult. Right? But he's very frustrating. Right? But then what he is actually saying, and there's lots of signs that they are going to indict him for something that happened many years ago that they're having to change in order to make it where it's not past the statute of limitations. And it's a disgusting thing, right? It's basically he paid someone to be quiet that he slept with. Right? That's breaking it down, and let's assume that it happened, okay? But even if it did happen, unethical, kind of ugly, not something that I really want our leaders to do, but not illegal. Right? And now I know they say, well, it could have been campaign funds. We have had that happen before, and guess what? Fines are levied. People aren't handcuffed and marched into to the arraignment, right? This is clearly a political move, and what is it designed to do? It's designed to cause chaos. It's using the political machine to do things that, as conservatives, we've always said, no, don't use the political institutions like that. But their conviction is that great. They want to do whatever they can. And I think there's multiple angles that you can come from this, because it probably will actually help Trump, which I think is ultimately what they probably want, because they know that he probably won't win in a general election, right? Like there's all kinds of, who knows, because none of it makes sense. And it goes against the founding of our country, right? That's one of the things that we talk a lot about here is looking back at the founding principles. And we are so far away from them. And it is scary. And we need to remind ourselves of kind of the basic understanding of judicial practice. And it was very different, and it came from a biblical understanding of how law was supposed to work. And as I read this, just think about how close are we to this now? This is John Locke. He's talked about this. He said, freedom of men under government is to have a standing rule to live by, common to every one of that society, and made by the legislative power erected in it. So he's talking about why we need laws. Like you do have to have laws. But he also says this. Well, maybe not. John Adams, says, no man will contend that a nation can be free that is not governed by fixed laws. All other government than that of permanent known laws is a government of mere will and pleasure, right? So it's saying we need to have, oh, that's weird that it's not showing the right one, is it? Oh, well, there it goes. That's actually the one I want. Okay, so our technology is completely off right now. But John Locke, the end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. For in all the state of created beings capable of laws, where there is no law, there is no freedom. For liberty is to be free from restraint and violence from the others, which cannot be where there is no law. So the idea of law, we know that it's important in order to have freedom, right? But it can't be abused, right? And that is what we are seeing happen very clearly. And that there is no standard rule of law that is just applied however it wants to be applied. And the danger of this, and you've probably heard in the news, a banana republic, right? Is that one party, goes after the leader of the other party, and then as soon as the power changes, it goes back. We are very close to that, in fact, are kind of there, right? And that's a dangerous place to go. It says, I thought this was interesting, and nothing's changing now, is it? So don't read up here, just listen. Aristotle said, even the best of men in authority are liable to be corrupted by passion. We may conclude then that the law is reason without passion, and it is therefore preferable to any individual. Thought that's pretty interesting. That's Aristotle. Again, Aristotle, the founders, they were looking at all of this stuff, right? Things that have been taught and thought about of reason, of religion, all of those things, all of these different philosophies, and they put them into something that was completely unique and created the greatest society in history by many measurable metrics. And we are acting like that they were just completely stupid. And therefore we're going back and, well, we're turning into a banana republic. James Madison, and I don't think it will, there it goes. James Madison, it will be to little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice, if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood, if they be repealed or revised before they are promulgated, or undergo such incessant changes that no man who knows what the law is today can guess what that will be tomorrow. Law is divined to be a rule of action, but how can that be a rule which is little known and less fixed? Wow. I mean, have you looked at a law book? Don't. It's ridiculous. I mean, there's actually a book that's written that makes the case that all of us commit like 3 felonies a day. Every day. The average person is committing 3 felonies. If you go by state, federal, all the laws that are there, that are still on the books, it's ridiculous. It was never designed to be like this because they knew that you can't start using the law to persecute other people and persecute the opposite political party. We are in a really dangerous place, and these are just a couple of the things that are going around and no one's even paying attention to what's going on internationally. There's lots of stuff going on, and as Christians, we need to be aware of that. We need to hold on to these principles, but we need to understand that it's going to continue to get worse before it gets better. We do need to be holding our elected officials, find true conservatives who are actually going to wrestle with this of how do we use the political institutions to stop what is evil, but yet not to infringe upon freedom, right? That's a balance, and it is not easy. And if we were a moral people, if we were still a God-fearing people, this would be a much easier task, but we are not. We have people that are truly believe things that are evil. They believe that they are good, and they are trying to use the government to actually make those things happen. And unfortunately, we have to push back against that and encourage our elected officials to actually stand up for what is right, rather than just kind of all being the same, which unfortunately, right now, no matter what political party, you see a lot of that. But as we continue to move forward, continue to pray, the good thing is we can know that we have a foundation to go back to, right? And it wasn't that long ago, historically speaking. It feels like a long time ago. But those are basic principles that we can go back to, that we need to continue to instill in our children and in our grandchildren, because that cannot be lost. Even if our school systems don't do that, we need to make sure we are sharing those truths and those foundations that got us to this point that we are rapidly trying to go the other direction on. But I thank you for joining us, and we will be back on the first Tuesday of April. So not next week, but I think it's that following Tuesday. First Tuesday will be our next Truth Seekers. Thanks for joining us.